Hmm. Oh. So today I'm here with Sarah, and I am going to let her introduce herself, but let me just tell you why I picked Sarah. So I really find Sarah's background amazing. She had a career in healthcare. Life handed her a bit of a surprise, and all of a sudden she had to make a leap and transition into something that she could be her own best boss ever. And what I think is so cool is yeah, exactly. And you picked a topic of, and I'll let everybody kind of hear it from you, but you picked a topic that I think is so crucial to actually helping leaders become a best boss ever as your passion and the focus of your business. So it just seemed like Sarah had to be on the show. So Sarah, thank you so much and welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me, Christine. Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Yeah.
And just tell everybody really quick, the name of your business and just kind of a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So my business is Greatness Magnified, and I'm Canada's recognition expert because what we consistently found in any team consultation, even if it was from an abundant place, the easiest way to gain collaboration and build trust and momentum was through recognition. We tried all kinds of other things that would help too out of our deep toolkit in organizational development. And the one thing that always worked. And to your point around best boss ever, why does it work for teams? Because that's what makes people give their discretionary effort and make them want to do their best. And so not surprisingly, it's also what makes leaders great bosses. So that's what I get a chance to do. I get to work with great bosses, great organizations through the exponential power of recognition.
That is amazing. And I know for me personally, recognition always was a big amplifier for sure during my corporate days. So, so to start by telling us a little bit, when I asked you the question, who's your best boss ever? Tell me who came to mind and why.
Well, I'm lucky that I had to really sift through a number of people. Aren't we lucky to have many, many
Yes.
options? Yeah. The one that really stands out in my mind is Louise Taylor Greene, the current head of the Human Resource Professional Association of Ontario. And what made her my top choice was that when I had to share with her some pretty tricky news. So here she had lost her director of organizational development. So now she's got all of me and my colleagues, individual contributors reporting to her. She's a senior executive. She doesn't have time to meet one-on-one with us, but every week she made the time because she wanted to support us wholeheartedly to continue to do the great work we were doing. And also because the organization so needed us in this massive time of transformation. And in one of those meetings, I had to tell her, a local organization, another healthcare hospital, has asked me to come and start up the organizational development department. And I kept saying no, and they kept asking me, and I went for an interview and I got the job, and it just seems like such a great opportunity. And I expected her to be so angry with me. This was a terrible time to leave. And what she did was she pushed all of her papers aside, the list of things that we needed to talk about and the files that her and I had both brought to the table. And she said, okay, the next 4 meetings if you give me 4 weeks, the next 4 conversations we're going to have is about you and your next phase of your career. And that's exactly, she just said, I'll trust that you're going to hand over the projects. We don't need to talk about it anymore. And that's what she did. She mentored me in having the best boss transition. That's what I'm calling it now. And so, for example, she helped me discern how to create a value proposition process so that when I started the organization, I initiated the first blush of people's experience of organizational development was one of collaboration and support versus them resisting it or me having to prove myself. She said, just believe that you're already there and your partners partnering with them and to serve them. So what would that look like? And we co-created, much with her guidance, the most amazing new way to start, not to start a department, but to start any job. And I have to tell you, I have led and mentored so many people in that process, all down to Louise's support and guidance.
So basically mentored you into a job with a different organization.
When it completely blindsided her. I had been in
Right.
that organization for 1 year. It was too soon to leave. It was a bad time to leave. She was probably so busy. She had small children at home still. And she just realized my job is to support this person across from me.
Wow. I find that amazing because one of the themes that's showing up as I'm sitting down and interviewing people about their best boss is this commitment to the person in front of them above and beyond their commitment to the business. And I bet a lot of CEOs would be very scared to hear that. Oh, by the way, these bosses, the reasons they're the best bosses is because they're committed to the person over the business, like actually the business. But it's so fascinating because, again, the impression that leaves on you, I mean, and the way that you would reflect on that experience, that'd be a game changer.
Well, imagine how many people I now have the privilege as a professional speaker to tell about her. So
Mhm.
a great example of that, because I speak for a lot of human resources groups and there's chapters across Ontario. We've got 22,000 HR professionals in Ontario alone.
Mhm.
And it's obviously a designated profession. So to have that term, you need to get your CCEs. So as I'm going from chapter to chapter, especially when it was announced that she was coming into this role, I said, you are going to love what she's going to do. I
Mhm.
know she's not in the role yet, but let me tell you. And I not only would tell the board that, I would stand in front of the people there, whether it was 30 people or 300 people in the room. Everybody, you wait until she starts. She is, and I would use my version of the story of the best boss ever. And then they all got excited because here is
Mhm.
the head of the most important association of your career who has already demonstrated she is for the quote people. So now
Mhm.
she doesn't have to just be for the one person, like in that
Right.
meeting. She just gets to be the person for 22,000 people in Ontario. They
Right.
got pretty pumped.
But, and it's just, another thing that I have noticed in this, in some of the trends of some of these discussions is again, the followership or the way that these things come back later in your career. So that moment, I mean, I'm sure she wasn't thinking about what the return on investment was going to be if
Nope.
she gave you those 4 hours and she mentored you in that new role. But that again has been an amplifier for her because if she's
Mhm.
done that for a number of people who have worked with her, what are they saying behind her back, right? Like free, you've actually free branding, you've done
Yeah.
for her just because you couldn't help it. Like that's genuinely how you feel. So, it took no effort to say, oh, let me tell you about what an amazing leader she is. So I think that is an incredible story. And I think, it's just such a good example of the selflessness that shows
Mhm.
up in some of those best bosses that we
And
hear
you
about.
can't fake that. It didn't even take longer than half a second for her to push those papers aside. So
Right.
that's, to your point around it amplifies and it becomes this reciprocal process because she didn't think twice to support me. And again, that it wasn't from a self-serving place. It wasn't,
Right.
okay, well, how do I make myself look good? Or now I can put this on my resume that I mentored X number of people. It's who she is. And I think that's probably why she has taken this role in as the head of our association, because she probably could make a lot more money working for in the very senior roles that she's been in for the majority of her career. So best bosses ever in my experience, as I say, I'm lucky to have many. They do things because it's the right thing to do. And by doing the right thing to do, people respect you. They talk about you, they want to do well by you. I'm sure because I've at times been the best boss ever. I've also been the worst boss ever. You know, we can
Yep. Yeah,
have
me
those, the
too.
whole spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I model myself. I try to model, including now when I have folks who work in my private business. You try to aspire to be like them. They are your muse of who you, but you, because you have actually a model, a frame of reference to use. And so they
Mhm.
actually, your best bosses ever, they stay alive. We
Right.
remember, as you know, from, your neuroscience work and our, it's the neurolinguistic processing, all of that great, juicy, yummy stuff that you do so
Mhm.
well, Christine. We hardwire really strong emotions.
Yep.
And best bosses ever, just like the worst boss ever, they imprint themselves on our consciousness. We pull them up, or the feelings that they had, that they created in us in micro moments, in longer term relationships, because it's such an emotionally laden experience. So anyone who's listening here, I would say, what kind of emotional imprint are you making with the people who report to you, and frankly, that report with you? Because you never know, they could be your boss, you could be their boss one day.
Yeah, things change quickly. I know that for sure. And you're right. I think that's actually one of the benefits that I'm really trying to drive with the work that I do with so many leaders is that, when you've worked for a best boss ever, it's catchy. It's
Mhm.
like we can't help ourselves but mirror what we see in those best bosses ever. And so, you know, I kind of feel like in my work, the bar is low often. We're just trying to make sure
Mhm.
leaders aren't disruptive and that they don't have a lot of turnover. And we're just trying to basically help them kind of meet the minimum bar of not being a worse boss. But that's why I really came up with the name for the show, Best Boss Ever, is how do we
Mhm.
set the bar back up here again?
Yes.
Because I think the impact of those best bosses ever is a giant multiplier. This
Mhm.
isn't just about people feeling like they can come to work every day and they know what to get done. This is about people feeling like they would go the extra mile. They would walk on broken glass for that leader because that's how
Mhm.
much they feel passionately. So that's your point about, imprinting emotion, right? Is that they feel like I would do whatever it takes, so
Whatever
it's
it
such a
takes, and for my
special.
whole career, that person is, they're not, it's not a moment in time anymore. This
Right.
person is part of your career legacy. And that's where recognition, it's such an easy thing to feel passionate about. And for me to have dedicated my speaking career and sometimes working with some of those best bosses ever to rebuild programs that authentically align to their leadership, their organization's desire to not just get through. And as you
Mhm.
and I both know, that unfortunate statistic that only 30% of North Americans are truly satisfied at work. So
I know.
that's telling me in the context of our conversation, how many people are aspiring to be the best boss ever? And perhaps more importantly, how many organizations are aspiring to enable people to be the best boss ever? Because it's not like bosses generally, unless there's some kind of, really significant, bigger issue at play, people want to do well. They want to get up and go to work, whether it's, virtual and it's with your elastic pants on, or you're, in your Armani suit at work, whatever that looks like.
Right.
Bosses want to get up and do great work. They want to
Mhm.
get their work done and feel a sense of accomplishment. They want to facilitate others to do meaningful work. They want to notice greatness. They just, unfortunately, a lot of great bosses work in not so great systems with too much work to do, and we owe it to great bosses to enable them to be that way. And when
Absolutely.
nothing else enables that to happen, what I tell those great bosses who want to do great work, but they're greatly overwhelmed, forever recognize others' greatness. Notice the small, seemingly invisible or microscopic examples of what's working well, things to acknowledge. That will give you the hope and the fuel and the food for continuing in
Mhm.
systems that are often not set up for people to lead and become the
Right.
best boss ever.
You're making me think of a really important one of my experiences when I led a large team.
Mhm.
I had one guy on my team who he was brand new. He was as green could be,
Yeah.
but he would get up in the morning and be at the plant at 5 in the morning and
Mm.
really was saying to the client, we're here, we're serious, like
Mhm.
we're not just going to show up when it's convenient, we're going to show up when you're in business and you're doing the operation, right? And so him being there at 5 in the morning and representing us was so important. So he had these incredibly long days, and I remember he was off to LA to go visit some family on a Thursday. And I said, hey, you know what? Why don't you catch the early flight and go? Like, you've been working around the clock, get there early enough that you can go have like dinner with some sunshine. It's California. It was in the middle of the
Mhm.
winter. And oh my goodness, did I take a giant um, lashing from my boss. And so when my boss showed up that day, he said, "Well, where is this gentleman?" And I said, "I let him leave early because he's been, in at 5 and he's been doing great. He's new, so there's still a
Mhm.
lot of things that he's trying to get up to speed on, but he's really been bringing his best self,
Mhm. A game.
um,
Yeah.
on tough hours, on hours that I can't even keep up with." And oh my goodness, did I ever get beat up over that one. And it really sent a message to me. But when you made the comment about enabling people to be best boss ever
Mhm.
material, it just dawned on me. I haven't thought about that element of it, and
Mm.
how I think for me, that was one of the most frustrating parts of being a leader, was
Mhm.
that I felt like I was in an organization where they were more worried about me being too kind, then
Right.
they were almost worried that somehow I was going to be so soft that all the results were going to fly out the window. And meanwhile, my argument was exactly the opposite, where I was like, why don't you just let me do it my way, and let's prove it. Because all
Yeah.
I know is I was nominated for manager of the year by the people who worked for me. So like, let me prove it and let me show you whether or not it works. But people were so scared that the results were going to drop on my team because I was doing things as
Mhm.
thank yous, right? Non-monetary things.
Love it. That's what number one way people want it.
Well,
Awesome.
right, because I didn't have, a big they didn't hand me a bag of money to give out as
Right.
gifts. And
Yeah.
so I was always trying to come up with clever ways. And a lot of the times it might be, a special occasion or some way that somebody
Mhm.
could spend that extra evening with their family, so that they could come
Mhm.
back on Monday and feel like, hey, my boss, gave me a little extra here this week. I'm going to give a
Mhm.
little extra this week, and like, to
Yeah.
create that trade. Anyway, I just think that is such an excellent point about enabling leaders to be a best boss ever, and how important that is to the equation of actually being one.
And thank you for sharing that story. And I'm so glad that you're the type of individual, type of human that's willing to risk being raked over the coals by your boss, to do the right thing. And I know I've even had that experience with peers in my last senior leadership role. If we had an issue at senior team on Tuesday that we didn't know how to fix, because frankly, most of the time you don't. If
Right.
it was that easy to fix, it probably wouldn't make it to senior team. And
Right.
it wouldn't be something we have to revisit the next week. So every Friday, I had the whole day blocked, and I'd spend part or all of it shadowing somebody at the front line who knew more about the situation because they were living it every day.
Right.
So we had beds backed up in the ER, or we had an infection outbreak that on one unit, but not the parallel unit. Or were having an increase in number of complaints of a particular area. I go and I would spend time in whatever they wore, tennis shoes and scrubs, or my normal clothes, if that's what he needed. And people would tell me stuff. People could not people didn't initially feel like I was there to help and understand and serve. They initially were suspicious. So what does that say about us as leaders? I mean, I don't
Mhm.
just mean in that organization, because I think that that would happen across many organizations, if not almost all, is people would be suspicious. Why is the boss showing up? But what I
Right.
found is I could get over that suspicion pretty quickly, and word gets around. Oh, if she shows poking her nose in on Fridays, it's just because she's learning something and she's curious and she wants to help. Here's the other thing though, Christine, I don't know if you've had this. My peers didn't like it. I mean, I could get over the not liking it initially from the staff, because if only the holdouts were the people who'd be negative anyway.
Right.
It was my peers who didn't want me to, quote, make them look bad. And I'd say,
Right.
well, go and shadow them. And, and we're all busy. So I'm not trying to minimize.
Right.
They're doing the best they can. They're leading the way they felt they needed to lead. However, if you want to be the best boss ever, it often takes courage to be different and to say, I don't think we're leading in the best way. I don't think that this is helping. I don't know if our customers are happy with us. So you have to be sometimes willing to be the worst colleague ever, the worst,
Yeah.
report ever, the worst, I don't know, advocate ever, or the best advocate ever, to be seen as the worst collaborator ever. Because it's not in nice, tight, just, discrete parts. It's not like,
Right.
oh, if I become the best boss ever, that equates to the best fill in the blank.
Right. No, it's controversial. And that's why I actually love this topic, because it's there, it isn't black and white. Just like you said, being a best boss can get you in trouble in different parts, or, like you said, when you're really hunting for truth, sometimes that can cause trouble in other camps. So sometimes it's really, how are you able to navigate so many different variables at the same time? I think so. Okay. I have last question for you.
Okay. Yeah.
So anything come to mind when you think of your worst boss ever?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Ironically, it's the person that I reported to and my husband reported to. We met in the restaurant industry, and he was managing a restaurant by the worst human ever, not just boss. This person would rival, insert who you think is the worst human ever. She's beside that person. She just happens to be less famous,
Oh,
so you
no.
pick your worst human ever. She's up wherever they go after you leave this earth. That is where she's hanging out with them and having a really awful dinner.
Right.
It was just, and so Mark and I talk about her still at the dinner table. And we use this as an education with our kids about, you do not need to be treated badly or work in an unsafe environment. So here's the worst boss ever. So she initially hires people based on their looks, first of all. So discriminatory. So
Nice.
I guess I got enough of a pass that I made it through the door, which
That's how you met your handsome husband, right?
That's how I met my handsome husband. Exactly. So, it's,
I was just going to say, not so bad after all.
not so bad. Okay. So maybe I should pick a different example. No,
That's right.
But I mean, she would treat us, you never knew. She was one of those folks, you never knew what you're going to get. Occasionally she would be sweet as sticky syrup, and you were like, oh gosh, what happened? And you tippy toe around. More often she was just, if she came by, it was like a thundercloud. And she was this tiny, like probably half my size. If the wind blew, she'd blow over. Just this tiny lady, but her volatile emotions and presence was enough to scare even the customers. And why? So nobody complained. So she could control everybody underneath her thumb. And she worked all the time. She was a very unhappy person. And we all knew that that's why she was the way she was. But she made people, climb up. If the gutters were blocked, she'd say, go climb up that ladder, that rickety ladder, and you could fall off. If a dessert in the fridge, the cooler was not working properly in the fridge and the food got mold on it, she'd say, scrape it off and serve it anyway.
Oh, no.
Parsley always was dirty because she had to buy the cheapest parsley ever. And we had to, quote, conserve water. So it didn't get washed properly. And I would have to, to go and feed it to the people. She didn't always get the linen properly washed. It was just gross. It was gross. And she was so cruel. She would feel like the smallest person ever. And if a customer complained, because we worked in Niagara on the Lake, so you often wouldn't see these people back, and this was pre-Yelp days. She didn't care if she she dressed you down. If you complain, Christine, she'd say, you know what? You're the little tiny woman and I don't need to deal with this. I run this big successful restaurant. I don't care what you think. She'd actually insult you to your face in front of your family.
Wow.
And people would have their jaws sitting on the sticky
Yeah.
table.
After eating their dirty parsley.
They're dirty parsley and they're moldy, they're moldy
Oh,
buns. Oh, it was
oh,
terrible.
that is unbelievable and creates, I bet, a very rich conversation around dinner.
Yes.
I don't know if I'd lose my appetite talking about that too much, but
Hopefully
that
they
is
appreciate their parents
incredible.
cooking more.
That's right. That's exactly right. It could be much worse, kids, if you don't
It could
like
be
this.
much worse. There's nothing moldy here. Yes.
That is, but it's just interesting. So I have two questions about that. And the
Mhm.
first is, number one, people don't treat people like that unless there's, we already know hurt people, right?
Yeah.
Is the way
Yeah.
it works. Any guesstimate as to where some of that toxicity really at
Mhm.
the end of the day came from?
Well, I probably have greater insight because my husband did work, as her right hand, and he never put up with her nonsense, which is, I think, the only reason why he was able to do that. So he knew he had a bigger window. Her husband was, unfortunately, he had an addiction to alcohol,
Uh,
and he was a player
mm,
and would constantly cheat on her, and she put up with that. So I mean, to each
yeah.
his or her own. If that's fine for you,
An
that's fine.
awful marriage at home, right?
Unfortunately, I think in her case though, she just felt she had to find another outlet. He made her feel terrible, and he ignored her, and he was often away. So she then, when it was actually correlated, the more he would behave in a certain way, she would behave in a certain way. The other thing was she had 3 children and all of them hated her.
Oh,
So that also is an indication that there's something not great with relationships and
yeah,
the way you are with people. So
right.
it's a chicken or the egg. Is it that their behavior or their detesting of their mom creates her to be not nice
Sure.
to us? Or did something have to happen to create all 3 children, you
Right.
know,
Right.
being, and they
Some
actually they don't talk. They didn't go to her funeral. They never were
Oh,
by her
no.
bedside when she
Yeah,
had a stroke. So
that's
I
awful.
I think that there was a very unhappy family dynamic by the time
Yes.
I joined the organization, and that's unfortunately sometimes the case. I don't know how
Yeah.
often, but
Well, again, it just speaks to, some of the things when you start thinking about what enables a best boss ever, when we look at what's happening at home, it
Mhm.
definitely pours through into how we lead. And lots of leaders will tell you when they are unhappy how
Yeah.
hard it is. I mean, this is definitely sounds like a much more amplified case, but it's just interesting because, many of us, and I know myself included, when things aren't great at home,
Mhm.
that frustration still shows
Mhm.
up everywhere else too. So,
I
and then
and
I'm just,
I've had
I'm
a
sorry.
great boss who's shared with me some lessons learned from stories and situations. So maybe, that part B to that, which I so appreciate your reflection, is who chooses to take those challenging experiences and use those as lessons to more junior folks to elevate
Right.
them to learn, like, this is what I went through, maybe you can learn from that, as opposed to it become you now get to be victimized by my sense of injustice or unhappiness in the world.
Right.
'Cause we
Right.
don't all come out of this world unscarred or with life being a fairy tale. So how do you
Right.
choose to use your message? So do you make it extra messy, or do you help other people to leverage or to work through challenging times? So
Right. Excellent. Well, this has been absolutely lovely talking to you today. I'm just smiling because I had a few aha moments myself. So I've written them down and I'll be thinking about them as I reflect on our call. But you know what? It was great to hear your story about Louise. And again, I really appreciate the work you're doing around recognition and how you're helping leaders build that into their practice, because again, I think we'll have more best boss ever candidates if we can find more people who are willing to
mm,
build strong recognition skills. So thank you,
the
Sarah, so
easiest way
much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Have a good one. Take care.
You too.
Mm. All right.